Father.
Son.
Daughter.
Brother.
A sister. I am a student.
Stay-at-home mom.
Construction worker.
Volunteer.
I am loving.
Smart.
Funny.
Generous.
Way too generous.
I am all of the amazing things you see.
But there's something you can't see.
Or don't see.
Something that I don't let anybody see. Like when I'm alone.
In a room full of people.
You can't get out of bed.
And maybe I've gained weight.
Or lost weight.
Why do men always lose weight?
It can get dark in here.
Really dark.
Addicted to food.
The web.
Work.
Sex.
Alcohol.
Something to take the pain away.
To feel happy.
To feel something.
Anything.
Nothing.
Because depression isn't a mood.
It's not a passing thing.
Or a bad day.
It's a disease. I can't just get over it. It feels like I'm underwater.
Drowning.
And sometimes I think you'd be better off without me.
I am telling you this. All of this.
Because I need help.
And you are my wife.
My dad.
My husband.
My kids.
My boss.
So please, don't judge me.
Leave me.
Fire me.
Please, be patient.
Don't give up on me.
Just be there for as long as it takes.
Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't real.
Yes, mental illness is something not often obvious to the eye, but it is real. More than 17 million people worldwide are dealing with depression, substance abuse, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. And these are some of the most common mental health conditions. Here at home, 1/3 of South Africans suffer from mental illness. And out of every four of these, only one will get some kind of help. Every day, an estimated 21 South Africans commit suicide. And for every one successful suicide, there are 20 more that attempt but fail to take their own lives. These are some of the staggering facts we will address in today's show. Now, 10th October is World Mental Health Day. So today we focus on mental health, and we have experts who will help us understand all aspects of this topic better. Now, be part of the show by calling us with your questions or views on Johannesburg 714-6843, 6847, 6857, or interact with us on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk, and on Twitter at SABC Health Talk. I'm Dr. Seloma Daum, and this is Health Talk.
A mental illness is a disease that causes disorder in thought and behavior, resulting in failure to cope with life's ordinary demands and routines. There are more than 200 classified forms of mental illnesses. Some of the more common disorders are depression, bipolar, dementia, schizophrenia, and anxiety disorders. Symptoms may include change in mood, personality, personal habits, and social withdrawal. As a sufferer from mental illness, Mr. Britton also had to face his symptoms head-on.
No, there were voices in my head telling me that I should leave, and this is a dangerous place, and that people were going to injure me here, and they were after my life. So I decided that I must get away from this place. It's a very painful experience. It deals with you having to take your medication, and before I was refusing the medication for one day, and the symptoms began, and Mr. Moyo tried to call the police so that I could go there.
According to the Mental Health Federation of South Africa, 1/3 of South Africans suffer from mental illness, and 75% of them will not seek help because they are frightened by their illness and fear the stigma and discrimination. Like many mental health sufferers, Mr. Britton had to be persuaded to seek help.
I started out with my aunt. She brought me to this place. I had some problems finding accommodation suitable for a person suffering from mental illness. Fortunately, I was accepted here by Mr. Moyo, the psychological facilitator, and the whole staff opened their arms to me.
Some mental health patients say they are denied employment, education, housing, and most of all, treatment for their condition.
I don't think people understand completely the issue of mental health as a whole, or mental illnesses, the people that we see on the streets. So they are not basically as individuals taken seriously, even in their family environments, where you'll find that a person is an elder brother with mental illness. Normally, when a person is an elder brother, people respect them. But because a person has got mental illness, they take that and then use it and not give that respect.
Aspect says it is important to allow the mentally ill person every opportunity to realize their highest potential by stimulation, training, and acceptance as soon as the illness is diagnosed. And families need to learn how to recognize the early stages of the illness.
I think firstly, as families, we need to be observant, because there are symptoms that they present themselves before you can even think that a person has mental illness.
Coping with a mental illness can be challenging. Talk to your doctor or therapist about improving your coping skills and consider these following tips.
Right, so the burden of mental illness is said to be worsening in South Africa. Now, according to a recent study, South Africa already has a high rate of substance abuse, with, for example, alcohol alone being the third highest contributor to death and disability among citizens. Mental illness affects everyone, from men, women, children of all ages. For instance, 48% of new mothers suffer from postnatal depression. And on the other hand, a great majority of adults diagnosed with depression are still likely to be at work, despite the knowledge that employees who are depressed are 5 times less productive than those who are not. Now, let's understand this a little more from our special guests. First up, we have Dr. Mashadi Motlana, who's a specialist psychiatrist, and Dr. Motlana is also head of the South African Association of Psychiatrists. Welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you.
All right, and next to her we have Lorena Carelli. Lorena Carelli is a senior counsel from SADC, South African Anxiety and Depression Group. Welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and last but not least, Dr. Ian Opperman. Dr. Opperman is a clinical psychologist and a representative of an organization called SAISA,
Psychological Society of South Africa.
Correct, Psychological Society of South Africa. Welcome to Health Talk, all of you.
Thank you very much.
Perhaps let's start with you, Dr. Motlana. Now, you know, we talk about statistics, and we know that, you know, we don't have accurate statistics in terms of mental illness. I mean, we spoke off air now around the issue of whether or not it is a third of South Africans, you know, who suffer from mental illness, or is it a lifetime risk of 30%? Now,
yes.
Can you just clarify us on that? Do we actually know what the actual burden of mental illness is in South Africa?
We don't have very accurate data, but we've got one epidemiological study, the South African Stress and Health Study, which was conducted or published in 2009 by a group of scientists in the Western Cape, amongst them Professor Dan Stein. And they found that the lifetime prevalence of a mental disorder is 1 in 3, so that's over a lifetime. Right. However, the incidence in a 12-month period is about 1 in 4 South Africans that may suffer from a mental illness.
All right. So safely, we could say at any one time, 1 in 4 South Africans will have some sort of mental illness.
That's correct.
Now, I know that this is a very broad subject. I mean, there's no, you know, it's just not possible to talk about every type of mental illness. But what are some of those common mental illnesses that we suffer from?
Well, we can classify them really in terms of the serious mental illnesses and the less serious mental illnesses. Right. So when we talk about serious mental illness, we include in them the psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia, which invariably has a poor prognosis in the majority of patients, but can also have a better outcome, provided it's picked up early enough and there's a treatment intervention. Then we also speak about bipolar disorder, which is also a mood disorder, and that may also present in a way that is quite disabling for a patient. It's episodic in nature, so they may, with treatment, achieve a remission, but need to be on medication, usually lifelong, in order to remain stable. We speak about depression. Depression may be mild or major, and a major depressive disorder, this is the disorder that usually causes some kind of dysfunction and may keep someone from functioning optimally in the workplace. And we know that the one compounds the other. So the non-communicable diseases, if you have a mental illness plus a non-communicable disease such as diabetes, the one may make the prognosis of the other worse.
We're going to come back to that because I'd like us to just, take that a little further. But let's perhaps invite a comment from Dr. Opperman. I mean, as a psychologist, you obviously are in touch on a daily basis almost with people that have some sort of mental illness or risk factors thereof. Now, what sort of impact do mental illnesses have on the sufferers?
It is huge. People suffer with huge things. They don't know where to go for help. They try and self-diagnose. They try and self-medicate, and therefore alcoholism, drug addiction, other problems. Pornography is big at the moment that we see in private practice. A lot of people are desperately unhappy. They don't know where to go. They don't know what to do about it, and just live lives of quiet desperation. And of course, the invitation is go and see a professional. There is help. We don't need to be in a place of desperation. We can live happy, content lives with the right help.
I mean, earlier I mentioned an example of depression, at the workplace. Are we beginning to get stories of how unproductive people are as a result of depression, do you think?
Yeah. I often see people who work for themselves, for instance, and they come to me and they say, I know my productivity level is 0, not even a quarter of which is the number you mentioned. And I'm going to lose my business. And the people who work for me can sense that if the CEO is not in place or if the managing director doesn't do his job, it all just flattens out, basically. And with a few sessions, with a bit of help, with getting them onto the right medication, they become productive, after 5 to 10 sessions. So there is help, but it's huge. The impact is huge. I work with a certain percentile of the population, but I mean at lower levels. I mean, we all know that some days you just wake up and you just feel, and that day your productivity is much less than what it normally should be.
Lorena, perhaps, just coming to you now, let's talk a little bit about suicide. I mean, this is becoming a huge problem in South Africa, I suppose elsewhere in the world. Just tell us a little bit about, what your experience is and insofar as the impact that this problem has.
Suicide creates a trail of unanswered questions, not only for, the people around them, but mostly for their family members. Why did they do it? Why didn't they seek the help? Where were the signs? Why didn't we see the symptoms, etc.? We need to consider, we need to say to ourselves that 1 in 5 teens commit suicide. 1 in 7 attempt it. So it is increasing. If we have a look at the statistics, 9.5% of unnatural deaths are related to suicide. So
and it's got a huge impact on the families.
Absolutely. Like I said, it kind of leaves a trail of unanswered questions because the family members, they blame themselves. They have this guilt. Why didn't we recognize the signs and the symptoms? Very often, sometimes they don't show any signs and symptoms, but it is so important as a parent or as a friend, anybody, especially the teachers, because our teens are so involved with teachers and they are at school most of the time, the teachers and facilitators need to step up and they need to see if there's anything that is inconsistent with the behavior of the individual.
Yeah. Dr. Matlala, let's get back to that issue of, the association between chronic ailments and mental illness. We have communicable diseases such as HIV and AIDS, and then we have other types of non-communicable diseases such as, you mentioned the example of diabetes.
And
what is the link between the two?
Well, certainly what we do know is that with the cardiovascular risk, that if depression is not managed properly, the prognosis is poor. So the risk of having cardiovascular incidents is increased. We know with diabetes management, it also compounds it if the patient has depression. Often they don't follow up, they don't take their medication appropriately because there's a lack of drive and commitment to taking medication as poor adherence. So the one makes the other worse. And we often underestimate the extent to which people with mental illness also have physical problems. So often their healthcare needs are neglected because especially we in the medical profession often box our patients, you know, that's the psychiatric patient, therefore they don't have any physical illnesses. And for that reason, their outcomes are also poor, also as a consequence of medication side effects. Outcomes may also be poorer. So
it's a vicious cycle, isn't it? So?
Absolutely.
All right, please stay with us because after the break, we now focus on causes and risk factors for mental illness. Don't go anywhere.
Get behind Rugby World Cup 2015 on SABC.
Welcome back to Health Talk. Now, what puts other people at greater risk of developing mental illnesses when compared to others facing similar stresses? If parents are diagnosed with a mental illness, will the children be at risk of developing mental illnesses later on in life? Is poverty a risk factor for mental illness? Well, let's put these questions to our special guest. We still have Dr. Mashadi Motlana, special psychiatrist and head of SASWAP Communications Division. SASWAP, by the way, is the South African Society of Psychiatrists. And then we have Lorena Carelli, who is a senior counselor in SADC, South African Depression and Anxiety Group. And then, of course, Dr. Ian Opperman, clinical psychologist.
Psychological Society of South Africa.
I remember that next time. All right. Let's just talk about, you know, risk factors and causes for mental illnesses. Perhaps let's start with you, Dr. Motlana. I mean, are there any genetic factors?
So broadly speaking, in psychiatry, we view mental illness as a combination of factors. And the search for genes that we can correlate with a specific mental disorder has been on for a long time. And the more we search, the more complicated and complex it seems. So the genes in psychiatry tend to be many, multiple, but of small effect, so that one gene or several genes are required in order for a person to manifest with mental illness. For example, the risk may be higher for bipolar disorder if two parents have a mental illness, and the risk may be around 25% that it might be passed on to the children. However, it may be less than that, or they may have another mood disorder such as depression. So the genes aren't that clear. However, we do know that there's an increased risk.
However, I mean, is it that it's only the genes, or do you require some sort of external environmental triggers?
That's right. So it's a combination of genes and environment. So the environment usually is a succession of stresses. It may be one major stressor or several stresses that together in combination with the genetic liability to cause mental illness may result in illness. Obviously, with a higher genetic loading, you need less stresses. With a lower genetic loading, you need more stresses, so that the two work in, together to produce mental illness.
All right. If we can, let's just try and track these risk factors and causes from, you know, around the time of pregnancy right through to old age, as it were. Dr. Opperman, I mean, around pregnancy, are there issues there that are risk factors for mental illness?
There are huge factors. You know, I'm a hypnotherapist, so I often go back to people being in the womb and so on. And the child can sense if the mother is under tremendous stress, if the child is unwelcome, if there's financial factors that affect this child is welcome financially, emotionally, if there's a stable family the child's going to be received into. So all those factors play a role. Poverty, absent migrant workers and absent parents play a huge role during pregnancy. So the mother's emotions during the pregnant time, during the time of pregnancy, is hugely influential on the mental health of the baby down the line.
Right. And I mean, talk about the baby. Children do have mental illnesses, don't they?
Hugely so. So. I mean, schizophrenia gets diagnosed now with 5, 6, 7-year-olds. And it's a new phenomenon that either people weren't so good at diagnosing it so many years back, or it's just becoming more and more prevalent.
Yeah, Lorena. I mean, the youth. Just now you spoke about the problem of suicide. Clearly, there are huge issues around youth and adolescents. Just take us through some of them.
Issues can come, like we mentioned before, environmental, school, family dynamics, what is happening in the context of those. And those all, are contributing factors which are going to either lead these teens to a successful life, or they're going to be taking their lives due to all these environmental issues and factors that are contributing to them wanting to end their lives. So there's a lot of things, like Dr. Opperman mentioned, poverty, violence, all of that plays such a significant role within, our teens that could lead them to the path of destruction or to the path of getting help.
She's mentioned an interesting one, poverty. What's your view on that? I mean, is it a cause or a risk factor for mental illness? I mean, thousands and thousands of people are exposed to poverty, but they don't necessarily suffer from mental illnesses.
Absolutely. I think it presents as a risk factor because of the stressful circumstances that someone may experience in an impoverished state. But it also speaks to what kind of resources are available in impoverished communities, the likelihood that they might also be exposed to higher levels of violence and trauma in those kind of communities, and the fact that mental illness may go unrecognized in those communities because there's so many other pressures. And unfortunately, in especially deprived communities, mental health literacy is quite poor, and so people who with real illnesses are often missed. And the first manifestation of illness may be a major psychotic episode or suicide.
Okay, all right. Dr. Opperman, the workplace, we spend quite a lot of, actually the majority of the time at the workplace. And there are issues there. Take us through them.
There are huge issues at work. There's huge stresses. People all need to make money. People need to make a living. There's often bullying at work. There's often faction formation. There's financial factors. There's stress. The world is under global economic pressure at the moment. So people feel that. People experience it.
All right. Just hold it there, because I want to come back to that economic factor issue. But I believe we have Anita on the line. Anita, welcome to Johannesburg. Welcome to Health Talk. You're calling us from Johannesburg, eh?
Hello.
Hi, Anita, welcome.
Welcome. Hello, thank you. I'm bipolar OCD, right? And I also suffer from severe chronic pain. And no matter what I do, I just can't get rid of the pain. It's terrible. It's like hell.
All right. Okay, let's see if our experts here will help you. Just keep tuned.
Yes.
Dr. Motlana?
So I just want to repeat, she said she suffers from OCD and chronic pain.
Chronic pain, yeah.
Okay. And nothing she does helps.
Absolutely.
Well, it doesn't seem to me initially that the two are necessarily related. But obsessive compulsive disorder, we don't quite know to what extent she has a problem, but it can be quite a disabling illness. The obsessions and compulsions can be difficult to treat. We normally use medications such as high doses of SSRIs. If it does not respond to treatment, may escalate to antipsychotic use.
So who should she
So the
consult?
primary caregiver is usually a psychiatrist, but the treatment would be in combination with a psychologist for cognitive behavior therapy to manage the obsessions and the compulsions. With a chronic pain disorder, I'm not quite sure what the primary source is. Certainly psychological factors can make a physical problem worse. Chronic pain could be from a chronic back disorder, chronic headache. I don't have enough to really comment on that right now.
Okay. All right, don't go anywhere, because after the break, we look at mental health services. Please stay with us.
Stand by. All systems ready. Three, two, one.
In public sector, a lot of workload is carried by psychiatrist nurses in clinics that are visited by psychiatrists either weekly or monthly, which makes it difficult for most patients to access help. The Gauteng MEC Qetani Mahlangu revealed that 138 male patients awaiting psychological evaluation for trial are on the waiting list to be admitted at Sterkfontein Psychiatric Hospital, and it can take between 8 to 12 months. The Department of Health has reported that 53% of hospitals have been listed to provide 72-hour assessment of psychiatric emergencies, in keeping with the provisions of Mental Health Care Act. Kodonia is a facility which accommodates patients after they are released from mental hospital. Here, they are encouraged to return to normal lives by participating in household activities.
We render social work services whereby we see residents at an individual level, where we get deeper to their needs, their feelings, their emotions, and help them to start realizing who they are, self-awareness. They set goals, work with them in achieving those goals. We also have job stations where we expose them to household activities, where they will go to the kitchen and learn how to prepare and serve meals. So you'll find that in all the job stations, our service users are there under the supervision of a staff member.
It also provides services to improve their level of functioning. Here, outpatients are monitored and encouraged to resume normal lives after leaving a mental hospital.
We receive residents mostly from the government hospitals. You'll find that these residents are ready for community reintegration or community living, but the families or support systems are not available in the communities. So we serve as a bridge between the community entry and the hospital discharge. So we are sort of a halfway house, whereby the services that we provide, you'll find that is something that is there at home. We don't have doctors, we don't have nurses, because there are no nurses at home. So it's more of preparing them to go back to the community.
The stigma attached to mental health still exists, according to the mental health activist. People living with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities are often subjected to various forms of abuse and discriminations.
The service users that we have, they are growing old, and with the mental illness, their condition is becoming more severe, whereby you'll find that our this group of people are no longer responding to our programs because they are old and they cannot cook, So we need a step-down facility for them, something like an old age home, but for people with mental disability, because old age homes that are available, they do not take our people because of the disability.
As you've seen, I mean, one of the reasons why only 25% of people diagnosed with mental illness get any form of help is that some do not access mental health care services for a variety of reasons, but mainly stigma. But do people even know what mental health services are available to them? Our guests will enlighten us on these. But before we invite our guests for comment, I believe we have Kathy on the line from Devon. Kathy, welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm actually concerned because I feel that a member of my family is a narcissist. Why I say that is because I thought of, first of all, it was bipolar, schizophrenia, and now I'm convinced it's narcissism. I've looked it up and Googled it and been on the internet. And her symptoms are so much like that. And it also says because they are very toxic in their relationships, and particularly with me, I think, the internet advises me to stay away from people like that because they bring you down and make you feel guilty. They show no empathy. They're just impossible to live with. And I would like the doctors to perhaps just advise me or tell me.
All right. Thank you very much, Kathy, for sharing your story with us. Please stay tuned, and we'll get some comment from our experts here. Dr. Matlana, I mean, there's the issue of narcissism, which is not well, maybe you tell us.
Well, narcissism refers to a personality disorder, which is a pervasive characteristics of an individual. It speaks to the way in which they relate to others from an extreme position of a grandiose self-esteem and can be very difficult to live with a narcissist.
Yeah.
The difficulty
but does it come as a result of the underlying conditions that she mentioned?
That's right, so I'll come to that.
Yeah.
The difficulty with narcissism per se, as with all other personality disorders, is for the person to recognize that they in fact have a personality disorder. Treatment is more or less therapy, intensive therapy. The one does not cause the other, but they can coexist. So, for example, a narcissist may have, in addition, another psychiatric disorder, such as bipolar disorder or even schizophrenia. The two aren't mutually exclusive. Usually, though, we prefer to make the diagnosis of one, and if there's a bipolar disorder, it may be very difficult to distinguish someone who's in a manic state and grandiose from someone who's a narcissist when they're not in a manic state. So it can be quite complex. I would suggest that the caller does seek help with the patient and explore further what exactly is the underlying management and proposal by the healthcare team, because it probably needs a team and not just a psychiatrist, but working with a therapist.
All right, okay, all right. Let's get back to our issue of, mental health care services. I mean, I made the comment that, people perhaps may not even know what type of mental health care services are available to them and by whom. Just take us through different categories of mental health services and caregivers, as it were.
All right. Our mental health care services in the country seem primarily to be focused on the psychiatric facilities, which is hospital-based. So most of our budget, unfortunately, is spent on that. But with the Mental Health Care Act of 2002, the emphasis has been really about treating patients in their community and trying to preserve the dignity of individuals so that access is easier and they're not isolated from their communities, because psychiatric facilities traditionally have been on the outskirts of society.
But who treats them in the communities?
So treatment generally in the community is by psychiatric nurses or primary healthcare nurses that have some training in psychiatry. Unfortunately, there are only about 500, just over 500 registered psychiatrists. So the likelihood of accessing a psychiatrist is pretty small in especially rural communities.
Okay, let's invite, sorry to cut you off like that, let's invite a comment from Dr. Opperman. I mean, as a psychologist, I would imagine your services are both in the communities and in institutions. Tell us that.
I represent Psychological Society of South Africa, so our members work in like the Department of Education. So there's a psychologist available in most public schools that they can. You know, and children are in schools, for instance, say the boy is gay, for instance, and he develops a mental health problem because of a core identity issue. Yeah. So with the right help at that early age, it could be dealt with early. We have members in the correctional services, in the police force, in the Department of Health, as I've mentioned, and so on. So there's members of ours on many, many levels that work with these things. And if it could, I'm very keen on primary health care, because if a problem could be caught at its early inception stages and be dealt with there, it doesn't have to develop into a huge problem down the line.
Yeah, well, maybe let's focus on that. I mean, on the preventative side now, talking about primary health care. What sort of preventative services do you offer in communities?
Like I say, I think the core place is basically in the schooling system. And the schooling system, there you can see children who come from impoverished backgrounds, from difficult backgrounds, who have problem parents, because you could see a child, they'll come and complain to the teacher. Yeah. And if the teacher has resources, and teachers are trained in a way where they can identify these children and then reach out to organizations like SADC, for instance, or other organizations, primary care facilities, psychologists that works for them.
All right. Lorena, maybe, if I could just ask you a question, what it is like to live with a mental illness in a family? I'm not saying you, but I mean from your experience as it were.
Well, often, chatting to people who, are family members of individuals that suffer mental illness, they have the sense of it's an overwhelming feeling. They don't know from one day to the next how the person's going to behave, the emotions, everything around that person. Let's say, for instance, schizophrenia. We deal a lot with going into communities and educating and letting them know and understand what schizophrenia is about. Very often we have a response like it's a bewitchment. They don't understand that schizophrenia is a mental illness. It's not a bewitchment. And in different cultures, they're going to believe, different things. So it's very, very difficult, because very often they say to us, well, this person has been bewitched, so what do? It is so important that, first of all, they need a proper diagnosis. Secondly, they need to get professional assistance, they need to be on the correct medication, and most importantly is staying on the medication.
And getting support from the family members.
Absolutely.
All right. So what is dignity in mental health? Do you understand what that means? Well, more on that after the break. Please stay with us.
I was diagnosed with schizophrenia 12 years ago. What does the word dignity mean to me? The first part is dignity within. The second part is dignity from the outside, from people, government, laws, and from the community.
It's a terrible burden to carry. No one ever feels relieved until life comes to an end.
you feel it is only God who understands what you're going through.
I had been going to work during a period of severe mania, and consequently, many colleagues were condemning me for my behavior.
It goes all the way to your family. The person that they look at is your family. So when it comes to the person who is mentally, they say, well, he will be cast out of the family. He will be an outcast. They won't know how to deal with him. They will say, oh, Oyomulalu. Oyomulalu. They say, oh, that one's a crazy person. That's the crazy one. So that person will literally have no place to call home.
In going public with my mental health condition, I had risked the possibility of a dismal future faced with discrimination.
It is very painful to see even people you expect to handle you with care turn out to shout at you, mock at you, torture and tie you up with ropes and chains in an isolated place, as if you committed a crime to succumb to a mental illness. It is all about a loving heart, a caring spirit. With love and respect for all humans, we should have dignity in mental health on a global scale.
Well, as you would have seen by now, the theme for World Mental Health Day is dignity in mental health. Now, World Mental Health Day is a trademark project of the World Federation for Mental Health. Now, the aim of this project is to show ways in which dignity can be provided in all aspects of mental health, ranging from care for the patients to attitudes in general public. So let's explore this concept of dignity in mental health a little more with our guests. We still have Dr. Mashadi Motlana, psychiatrist, Lorena Carell, senior counselor, and Dr. Ian Opperman, a psychologist. But before that, we have Anwar on the line from Johannesburg. Good morning, Anwar, and welcome to Health Talk. Anwar, are you there? Okay, we seem to have lost Anwar, but let's just get back to this concept of dignity in mental health. What are they referring to? I mean, and why dignity in mental health? Why is it important?
Dignity in mental health is crucial because often our patients suffer the pain of stigma, and dignity speaks about the protection of their rights to health care, to be treated with respect, to be treated in facilities that illustrate that they are respected and their needs are taken care of. Stigma comes in many forms. I think in the clip we saw some examples of public stigma, where that individual is discriminated against on the basis of the fact that they have a mental illness. Earlier we spoke about self-stigma, where an individual is so afraid of having a mental illness that they're too afraid to access health care. So dignity is about restoring that respect so that people aren't afraid to get help when they require it.
All right, I believe we have Anwar back. Anwar, welcome to Health Talk.
Hello, hi. Good morning, everybody. And thanks for the beautiful show. My concern is about the mental health of psychiatric patients. I know it's quite serious when they do not get the medication. Now, the Cliptown Clinic in Eldorado Park, they've been out of stock for medication for the last 3 weeks now. What happens in a case like this? What happens to the patients when they get ill? That's my concern. I think it's rather unacceptable.
All right. Okay.
That was my comment.
All
Thank
right.
you very much for the beautiful program.
Thank you, Anwar. Well, it's the issue of the importance of medication, of course, and availability of medication. Your comment? I know you're not representing the Department of Health, but I mean, it's a valid comment, isn't it?
I think it's a valid comment, and in fact, today it's a very important aspect of dignity, because dignity is about access to care, and if you don't have medication available to you, that denies you actually the dignity of care. We have had some medication problems in the past and currently. In fact, there's a stock-out campaign, and part of that is about saying, you know, until the mental health department implements the mental health policy, where there's some budget allocation that's fair and equitable, because mental health is still the Cinderella of medicine, then we will suffer a situation where our patients don't have access to care. What it does is drive up health costs, because if people don't get medication, rightly so, they're going to relapse, land up in hospital, which is much more expensive than providing the treatment at the clinic.
But at least in fairness, I mean, you know, the department isn't here, but it appears that the Minister of Health has taken this mental health concept quite seriously.
Absolutely.
Hence, you know, the appointment of the advisory committee to advise him on mental health.
Yes, so as a result of a summit, we were hoping for two things: that there'd be implementation of the policy, and the advisory council is now in place. So we're hoping with that we'd swiftly move to a situation where the policy is in place, and we can actually start to have proper resources for our patient throughout the country.
All right. Dr. Opperman, let's get back to this dignity. You know, there was talk earlier around dignity from within, and that helps quite a lot with the stigma issue. Just take us through this, you know, dignity from within concept.
I'm always scared if I talk about self-love, you know, you expect the violence to start playing in the background, but, you know, ultimately it's so important to look in the mirror and to be able to be your own best friend, to feel, to forgive yourself for whatever has gone wrong in your life, and of course getting feedback from the community, getting feedback from one psychologist and mental health caregiver to say, you know, I'm okay, you know, ultimately we want to, and the core concept that we understand is the most important thing in relationship is the quality of the relationship, is the quality of the connection.
All right, just hold it there, because I believe we have Grace on the line from Pretoria West. Welcome to Health Talk, Grace. Your comment.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I have a brother who is a medical doctor, and he is suffering from bipolar. We tried a number of things to help him, but it was all in vain. We even went to an extent of inviting police, whereby there were some number of things that he destroyed at home, so we laid charges so that he can be charged, and maybe one of the punishments will be him taken into a psychiatric hospital, but it did not work. As we speak, he's at home in a rural place, idling. We don't know what to do anymore to help him.
All right, thank you very much for sharing that sad story, Grace. Let's hear what our experts can comment on.
Yes, it sounds like they've walked a very sad story, and that they've walked a long journey. But what I don't understand is whether there's been consistent treatment throughout the time that Grace's brother's been ill. Often in bipolar disorder, unfortunately, it may be very difficult to find the right treatment the first time round, and so it can be a very long journey before there's a remission.
Okay. She mentioned the police.
Yes.
At this, if we assume that you know, he's not taking any medication, and that's the reason why he's in the state that he's in, any value in calling the police to force someone to take medication?
Well, the police are obliged to assist families in need when their family members may be violent, aggressive, refusing treatment. It's not to be seen as punishment, but as a way of getting someone to get help when their own judgment is impaired. But in this instance, I think Grace also spoke about some kind of crime being committed. I'm not sure if there was violence, and therefore they were hoping for him to be punished. That's a very separate process, where that is a Criminal Procedures Act. In a clip before, we heard about, you know, the waiting list for observations, which doesn't mean that someone necessarily has a mental illness, but may have to be reviewed for that purpose. But certainly for someone with mental illness, where it's very difficult to get them into treatment, the police are supposed to help. It may be difficult to persuade them, but they're obliged to.
You know what? Sad to say, unfortunately, we've run out of time. And this is how we come to the end of our show. Dr. Mashari Motlana, psychiatrist, SASOP, Lorena Carelli, Senior Counselor, SADC, Dr. Ian Opperman, psychologist from the Psychological Society of South Africa. I've got it right this time. Thank you very much for your contribution. Well, folks, unfortunately, that's how we come to the end of our show today. Please join us again next week on SABC News, and remember to please share your views and comments with us on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk, and on you can follow us again on Twitter at SABC Health Talk. You can watch a repeat of this show today at 2 p.m. And please note a change in our schedule. The next repeat is no longer going to be at 10 p.m. tonight, but on Tuesday morning at 5 a.m. So catch us early before you jet off to work. Otherwise, if you want to get access to any of our past shows, you can always get these from the YouTube link. I'm Dr. Silo Mutau. Please stay well. Thank you very much for watching.